YouTube. It's on YouTube, so I have to be up here. But anyway, you have a real treat tonight because you get to hear from our city manager, Mark Mondell. And I call him the city manager on steroids because he's just so passionate and so engaged in helping our city to come into the modern world. So we've accomplished a lot at the city government and the staff of the city in the last 3 years. So you're going to get a good talk tonight. And any questions you have, please don't hesitate, okay?
Thank you, Terry. So Terry is our most recent mayor. And this was her idea to put on these sessions. So thanks for coming. I always thought when you said I'm the city manager on steroids, just because I was so buff, but evidently for different reasons. So I'll provide you guys, I don't remember you being at the first session that I did, so I'll just give you a real quick synopsis of what the city manager does. And a little bit about the city. And then I think the focus of tonight was supposed to be economic development. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And you guys are, like Terry said, ask any questions you have. There's no dumb questions. Here we go. Oh, we know those faces. Welcome. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They come to these sessions and they keep learning more. I keep thinking, how could they learn anything else? They'd have to know everything by now. I don't think you guys have. So they've heard this before, but for the three new people in the audience. So there's two types of cities in terms of how they're run typically across the United States. There is a strong mayor form of government, and then there is a council manager form of government. Tulare is a council manager form of government. My personal opinion is that's the best form of government. And the difference is this, there's a number of differences, but fundamentally the difference is in a strong mayor form of government, the mayor is actually the chief executive officer of the city. So even though you'll have a city where they're both the same in the sense that they're both elected by the voters, by the citizens, in a strong mayor form of government, the mayor in that city actually is the one who runs the day-to-day operations of the city, and the other council members have the same responsibilities that the council and a city manager, council member form of government have. They vote on policy issues, and I'll get into that in a minute. In the city manager council form of government, which is what we have, you vote and you elect the council members, and then they have four primary responsibilities. They hire the city manager, they hire the city attorney, they vote on and they make policy decisions, and they vote on the budget. Those are the primary, I mean, they do a lot more than that, but fundamentally, those are the four primary things that only they can do, okay? And this is the council manager form of government. That's what we are in Tulare. Yep. So it's a council and they hire a manager. And the manager, that's what I am, the city manager. The manager is essentially the chief executive officer of the city. So the easiest way to understand it is if you look in the private sector and you look at typically, let's say a big business, doesn't have to be a big business, but most big businesses, they have a CEO, chief executive officer, and they have a board of directors. Right? So the board of directors is the policy-making entity. They hire and fire the CEO. It's the same thing in what we have here. I'm the CEO, but my title is city manager. Council's not the board of directors. They're the city council. And the city manager's responsibility is to hire everyone else in the organization and administer the policies that are adopted by the city council, implement the direction that is adopted and voted on by the city council, run the day-to-day operations of the city, and then, prepare and present the budget to council. On a every 2-week basis, we have council meetings here in this chambers. The first and third Tuesday of the month. Those typically start at 7 and go to maybe 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, depends on what's on the agenda. Depends on who's running the meetings. The mayor in that case runs the meetings. So even though the council members, we have 5 of them, they get elected by the public, right? And they're elected by districts. If you look in your book, you'll see a picture of each of our council members and their districts. Okay, so you'll see who they are and what district they are responsible for. Even though they oversee that district, meaning they have to reside in that district to be elected to oversee that district, they really come together and they vote on the decisions that are the best decisions to affect the whole city as a whole, right? So they don't just run their district and they don't care about the other districts. They come together and they vote on issues that impact the city as a whole. And so what happens on a sort of day-to-day basis is, I run the general operations in accord with the budget and adopted policies and in accord with all the laws. And then I have directors that work for me. So over each department, there's a director. So the police department has a police chief, fire department has a fire chief, parks department has a parks chief, parks director, so on and so forth. They are actually the ones who, on a day-to-day basis, kind of get way into the weeds and run their operations. And then they report to me and then I report to council. Okay. And when we, on a first or third Tuesday, when we have a council meeting in these chambers, we will, as staff, bring to council the issues for them to vote on from a policy perspective. So you can look at any agenda and you'll see we have things for them to vote on. And some things we as staff can take care of and some things we can't. So it varies on what it is. Some things, like if it was a zoning change, somebody wanted to change the uses on their property, that have to be voted on ultimately by council. Staff can't make that decision. If it's something that's in the budget and already adopted by council, like we went to council and said we want to buy 10 new vehicles and it was already approved, then we would just purchase those through our processes. We wouldn't have to come back once they've approved that as part of the budget, typically. So on any of those nights, those Tuesday nights that you were to show up here, you'd hear all kinds of issues being brought to them. And what we do as staff is we prepare the issue, we prepare the recommendation, and we say, here's the issue, you can go left or right. We recommend you go right for these reasons, and then council makes the decision. They could go left, they could go right, they can decide they don't want to vote on it, they could kick it down the road to a later date, they can pick a whole different direction. It's their prerogative. As long as it's in law, in line with law, budget policy, they can do what they want to do. So that's why it's important. And my personal opinion is that local government's the best form of government because it's the most representative of the individuals who are electing those officials to represent them, right? So it's still a representative form of government. We have 5 people representing the 72,000 residents in our city. But what's great about it is you can come here on a Tuesday night and voice your opinion. You might have an opinion about how the federal government can run, but you're not going to call President Trump up. I mean, you could try, right? But you can call any one of the council members up. You can call me up at any time. You can come into my office and come see me. So it's, I think, the best form of government. The other thing that's great about local government is we have to have a balanced budget. So we can't adopt a deficit budget. We have to be able to, essentially the money's coming in have to sort of equal the money's going out. 100%. Yeah. And we also don't print our own money. So that's another thing that we don't do. I think it's also the best form of government because it's closest to the problems, right? So when we have a problem, let's say there's a sewer line, it's spewing waste everywhere. Like we go there and we fix the sewer line, right? When you look at other agencies, sometimes counties, state, federal, the further you get away from the problem, the harder it is, I think, to understand the problem and actually like sort of get your hands dirty and fix the problem. You're focusing on policy issues. And I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying that's the nature of the difference between local government and, let's say, federal government. Now, at the same time, we need federal government because, if we go to war, the city of Tulare is not going to defend you in that kind of conflict, right? We don't have an air force and a military, all those things. So that kind of gives you an idea of kind of how government's structured. I think another difference, just so you understand, there's in California, well, actually other states as well, but There's things called charter cities and non-charter cities. So they're general law cities. So they're created by, let's say, so to speak, statute. They follow just the statutes. We are a charter city, which means that when you're a charter city, you still have to follow all the laws, but you have a little bit more latitude in some ways in terms of how you can meet the laws and the intentions of the laws. You can't really adopt rules that are less stringent necessarily. You can certainly adopt rules that are more stringent than state or federal laws. So it just gives you a little more flexibility in the things you can do and how you do it. So we're a charter city. I won't go into much more than that unless you have questions, because I think you probably absorbed more of the information about the individual departments when you were going through the other sessions, right? So we'll talk a little bit about economic development a little bit more. A couple of you were here when I talked the first time. I'll talk about it a little bit more because I think it's really important. When you look at our charter doesn't say anything about economic. Well, first of all, let me tell you what economic development is from my perspective. There's a lot of different definitions, and I guess it depends on your perspective. But for me, municipal economic development, city economic development work are the things that we do to create private sector job creation and private sector investment in our community. It's very, very important. Why? Because where do we get the revenue to run our government operation? It comes largely from the private sector, right? It comes from people who are living in our community and the businesses that are in our community. And so, we get property tax revenue, we get sales tax revenue from our businesses. Those are two really, really important funding sources for us because they're the most flexible. They go in what's called the general fund. Every fund we have, and we've got a bunch of them, has restrictions on what it can be used for. So there's a lot of times you could see things like, and people don't understand this, that you could see something like one fund might have very little bit of money in it, right? But another fund could have a huge amount of money. And people are like, oh, well, here's the problem. We have just take the money from that fund and put it over here. Well, it's not like a checking or savings account. We might have a fund that has a bunch of money, but it's restricted. It can only be used for road maintenance. It can't be used to hire more police officers or firefighters, right? The general fund is the one that that's the property tax and sales tax. We can use that for just about anything. I mean, anything that's legal and ethical, but it's limited. So this is not exactly correct, but it depends on how you look at it. But basically, we're about a 500 employee organization, about a $225 million budget. Our general fund's only 60 million. So people will say all the time to us, like, well, I pay my taxes, you should fix and you should do all these things. People would be shocked at how little your taxes actually pay for the operations. I'll give you an example. If you had a property that was valued at $500,000, you would basically typically pay about 1% of that value in property taxes. So you'd pay $5,000 a year in property taxes on a $500,000 valued property, okay? Any idea how much we would collect of that $5,000? We would get well, depends on how you look at it, but your tax bill would reflect that we, the city, would get 1% of the 5,000, which is $50 a year. That's how much we would collect on the tax bill to pay for everything we have to pay for. Because when you look at who's doing the things you want, that you need to have done, no one is paying in the city limits. No one's doing more of that than the city. Who fixes all the roads? The city. Who provides police and fire protection? The city. Who builds and maintains the parks? The city. Like when you go down this list, it's the city. Now, I'm not saying that the other districts that get the money don't deserve it, but most of the services that you receive hands-on, like directly as a result, it's the city providing those services, yet we collect so little of that money. Most of that money goes to a lot of different districts, like the school district needs it. It's very expensive to run schools, right? So I'm not criticizing or complaining. I'm just saying that's the reality of the situation. In terms of what we actually collect, even though it'd show 1% of the taxes that you pay, we actually collect about 14% of the money in terms of what's remitted to the city from the county, which is still good, still not a lot of money. Especially when you see that comparison, right? We have a budget that's 225 million, but we only collect 60 million in property sales taxes. Well, where does all that other money come from? It comes from a lot of different sources. It can come from user fees. It comes from revenue sharing with the state and the county. So like when you go to the gas pump and you paid a lot of tax. In California, you pay about $1, and every gallon, about $1 of that is taxes. That most of that money goes to the state, and then some of it flows back down to the county, and then some of it flows to us. But that money, again, is restricted. Gas tax revenue can only pay for street maintenance. I can't use it for hiring more cops, for example. So, so the revenue sharing comes from a lot of different places. And that's, ultimately how we fund government operations. But the cost of providing government services to residences costs more than the cost of providing services to businesses. So I'll give you a little example. Let's say you had 100 acres of land and it's currently being farmed, okay? And then you take that 100 acres of land and you convert it to single-family homes, a subdivision, okay? Well, the first thing you probably wouldn't realize is, and people are concerned about water, right? Which one do you think consumes more water? 100 acres of farming or 100 acres of single-family homes? It's the farm. Farming consumes more water. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying that's the reality. So when you convert it from a farm to a single-family homes from a water conservation perspective, you're saving water. Okay. But we also need farms to produce food, right? But anyways, now you have that single-family home subdivision. The cost for us to provide police and fire and all the different services we provide for that is more than if you had 100 acres and you had several businesses on that property. Businesses consume a little bit more land, like large distribution warehousing businesses, right? And so we have to have a balance. As a city, you have to have a balance of businesses and residents. If you're a city completely of residents, you will die a slow death because you can't keep up with the money you're generating from those homes, can't keep up with the cost that you have to spend. You will you see that happening all the time. You see a city gets developed and then the nice new subdivision in the suburb is just outside the city limits. It's just the next one out. They build this really nice one. Everyone wants to move to it. And then 30, 40 years later, it starts declining and people move out of that one. That's what happens when it's just residential, if you don't have a balance. If you're all commercial, nobody wants to live there, right? It's not a nice place. So you have to have a balance, right? Now let's talk about economic development again. When I say economic development is important, it's for all those reasons I just described to you. It's also important because that's where people get jobs, right? So if you want to put food on the table for your family, if you want to be able to send your kids to college, you got to have a job, right? And that's where that money comes from. So it's a benefit to the community. It's also the services we all want. You want to buy groceries, you're not buying it from the farm, you buy it from the grocery store, right? You want to go out to dinner, you go to a restaurant. You want to go get some clothes, you go to the outlet mall, right? So it's the services. So businesses are extremely important to us. The right kind of businesses, right? There's some businesses that you need to have a balance, but you don't want to be too heavy in one category or the other for all kinds of reasons. These are gross exaggerations, but if you had all smokestack businesses, then the air would be polluted and you wouldn't want to live there. If you have all retail businesses, that's great from a sales tax perspective, but jobs they don't pay high wages to employees for retail jobs. And you don't have a diversification of businesses. You got to diversify your businesses because if when the economy crashes, it impacts different markets differently. And if you don't have a balance, then you can have a whole sector go down and then all of a sudden creates you see this in older towns up in the Northeast where they had big steel mills or they had certain kind of industries. And all of a sudden that industry all went to China and that town just dissolved, right? So you have to have a diversification. For me, when I focus on economic development, we have to grow. Okay, so a city that's not growing is dying slowly. That's not always the case, but that's most often the case. There are some exceptions, and I can explain those if you want. But when I say growing, it doesn't mean you have to just get bigger, bigger, bigger. I mean, that's a part of it. We're 72,000 now. We'll probably get to about 130,000. That's about where we'll end up, is my feeling. And that will be probably over the next 30 to 50 years, somewhere in that time frame, maybe sooner. You do want to grow. But when I talk about economic development and I talk about growth, what I'm talking about is I refer to as economic churn. You need constant investment and reinvestment in the private sector occurring. You need more transactions. You need people buying property, selling property, expanding property, building a new building, tearing down an old one, building a new building, expanding a building. You need churn. You need transactions. And so that's what we try to find ways to encourage. And we do that through all kinds of different means. It's not in our charter to do any of this. Our charter doesn't say to do. So if you just looked at our charter, basically it's our job to run the business of the city. Police, fire, water, sewer, streets, parks. Just pay the bills. That's what you do. But if you don't focus on economic development and you don't have a philosophy and strategy around that, you may find yourself, what I often say to people is, if you're not interested in economic development, then you're going to get exactly what you deserve. And what I mean by that is whatever walks in the door, business decides to be in your town, you may get them, you may not get them. But if you're not competing for those uses, then sort of shame on you. You get what you deserve. There's a lot of people who don't want growth, and that's fine. I'm not saying all growth is good. I think managed growth is good. Again, that's that economic churn. But if you're not in, there's a lot of communities that are like, we don't want any growth. And some communities can survive that way. Some can. There are examples, and I can explain those to you. But most communities, especially one like ours, like an inland community where there is no particularly unique reason to be here versus, let's say, if you're a coastal community or you're a community tied to a major university, okay? I mean, the reasons here is people want to be here, and there's an agricultural industry, right? But it's not necessarily super unique to this area. You can be in Visalia, you can be in Porterville, okay. And so anyways, you want to try to be specific and deliberate in the strategies you deploy from an economic development perspective for all the reasons I just described to you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those strategies and some of the things we're doing and why. There's always a lot of misinformation out there, and so I like being able to have the opportunity to talk about this. And if after this presentation and you hear me talk about some of the things we're doing, when you hear, I'll make an announcement tonight that you'll be the first people to hear. We're going to issue a press release tomorrow, and you'll hear it from me firsthand. So when you start hearing on social media and other people, there'll be a bunch of people who say, that's one of the interesting things about government is, and any Tuesday night, we could have absolutely diametrically opposed opinions in the room. Somebody who will say, it doesn't matter what it is. I could say, everyone in this room is going to get $100, right? And I could have somebody say, why is it only 100? It should be $200. And I'll have another person say, why are you giving my tax dollars, the $100 to somebody else? Right? We'll have diametrically opposed opinions. Everything we do is like that. So you'll start hearing things on social media soon about what I'll announce to you here later tonight. And people have opinions about whether it's good or bad. Most of those will be uninformed opinions, and meaning that they haven't even heard as much as you're going to hear about it tonight. So they'll just draw a conclusion. I like it. I don't like it. Based on what? Well, I don't know. I heard somebody say something, right? That's always fun. But it's human nature, and it's natural, and it's the way it works. But it's great when you guys get involved and you can ask questions and you can find out a lot more about what it is. Okay. So I'm just going to take a couple examples in this book that you have and walk you through them a little bit about what we're doing and why. And then I'm going to open it up to questions. And then after the questions, I'll tell you about the secret project. Okay. Let's turn to not that one. Let's turn to this one, Zumwalt Park. Let's talk about that. That's on page, do we have page numbers? 11. Okay. So I want to talk to you about why we're doing Zumwalt Park. Okay. That is, are any of you familiar with that? Have you seen it downtown? Okay, let's talk about why we're doing it. So when I came to Tulare, council was very interested in hiring somebody who has experience, training, education, et cetera, with downtown redevelopment work and economic development work. And those are my two areas that I put a lot of energy into in my career. And I've been very fortunate to have a lot of success with those. And pretty much everything that I'm doing so far in Tulare, except for the homeless shelter, are things that I've done elsewhere. And so I know they can work. They're patterns. They can work here just as much as they can work anywhere else. So the key to downtown redevelopment, and notice I'm going to talk about Zumwalt Park. It's a park project, but I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of redevelopment. Okay. The key to redevelopment in any city, this is a secret. Most people don't know that, but in and of itself, it's not the secret sauce. It's the start. You have to have people living downtown. You have to have people shopping downtown, working downtown, recreating and entertaining downtown. You have to have all five of those things. And ideally, you have to have them all happening sort of at the same time. It's about people, and you have to have people with expendable income. There has to be energy. There has to be a reason to be downtown. People could say, well, why are you putting energy in downtown? Because I'll say, because the city has for decades. I mean, that's sort of how the city started, so to speak, right? Downtown, there's a lot of investment that has occurred over time in downtown. It is what I would say is this sort of singular, most downtowns are sort of the area that everybody owns. Like I can talk about all the city in different parts. Like the outlet mall and the ag center and all these other areas. But downtown is sort of, it should be everyone's. Everyone can enjoy downtown, hopefully, right? Downtowns, in order for them to be successful, also become sort of niche retail areas. In other words, you want to work towards them becoming more experiential than let's I'll give you an example. Let's say you wanted to buy a leather purse and you wanted to buy it in Tulare. Right now, probably your only option or your most likely option would go to the Coach store at the outlet mall. Okay. But what happens if all of a sudden we had a husband and wife from Italy who made custom leather products, and they decided or Portuguese family, it doesn't matter. They decided they wanted to relocate to Tulare and they wanted to make custom leather products. They wouldn't fit well at the outlet mall, but they'd fit perfectly in a downtown environment where now all of a sudden people come downtown and it could be more experiential, or like people come in and I want to watch you make this leather purse. And oh, you can make a leather purse? Can you make a leather jacket for me? A custom, right? So you do something unique. Retailers that do unique things, we don't have that here yet, but we're working towards that. All right, so that's like long-term. How do we get there? So we are working on all 5 of those things right now. One of the first ones we started with was Zumwalt Park. Remember I said you have to recreate and entertain, right? So we took Zumwalt Park, which was a nice passive park, just trees. Pretty much the only people that were out there on a regular basis, because my window, I sit right out looking at it all day long. Pretty much on a regular basis would be high school kids making out or homeless people sleeping there. Nothing wrong with some of that, but that's not doing a lot for us, okay? And so we decided we needed to make it an active park. Still a park. That's what cities do. We invest in parks all the time, all day long. No one else is doing it, us and developers. And so what we decided to do was build an amphitheater that would have a concert series, and that'll attract about 30 to 50,000 people a year to the shows downtown who otherwise wouldn't be coming downtown. And we're going to attract people from all over the region. We have a new splash pad and 2 new playgrounds that are part of it. It's all fenced off. So families can come during the week and on weekends. It's a park like any other park. Once it's finished, people can come just use it. Come use the splash pad, use the playgrounds, enjoy it. So our residents will be able to enjoy it. But on certain Friday and Saturday nights, it'll be paid admission to come to a show, to a concert. So we had our first 3 concerts last year. Just before it was finished, we had we had a number of people saying, "Oh, it's never going to work in Tulare. We'll never get good talent." All those kinds of things. There's nowhere to park. There's handicap ADA issues everywhere. We needed to dispel some of that as not being true, and we did. And we showed that we have plenty of parking. We attracted good talent, and actually we had a guy who goes around all the cities trying to sort of find ADA issues, and we didn't know he was coming. He coincidentally just shared some really good comments with us and said, from an ADA perspective, you guys are doing pretty good. Not great. It's not like we definitely need to improve, but we're working on that. ADA is handicap accessibility. And so the venue this year, we'll have about 12 to 15 regular concerts. Our producer will put on other shows, and then the city will put on some of the shows as well. But we have I think our first 4 concerts have been announced so far. I haven't kept track of it. I think 4. Well, we've got, I think, 9 planned already. We just haven't released all of them yet. The first one hasn't been released. That will be, so we had a show planned for May 16th. One of the bands had to drop out because health reasons. So they canceled their whole tour. So we had 3 bands that night. One dropped out. So we're going to move one of the bands to a different date, and we've just hired a new band to come in. Have you ever heard of the band Los Lobos? Da, 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 da. Yeah, those guys are coming on May 23rd. So we'll announce that real soon. That's one of the secret. See, when you come to this, you learn about secret things. But our goal, that venue will hold 6,000 people. We won't have many shows that are 6,000. Most of our shows, the bowl area itself, it's like terrace seating, the bowl area holds about 3,000. So most of our shows will be somewhere between 1,500 to 3,500. Sweet spot's about 2,500. Most of our shows, if we hit 2,500 paid attendance, we're going to be doing fantastic. And we'll have a variety of shows. We've got Aladdin, 3 bands that are Aladdin show, Latin music. We've got a couple country shows. Clint Black is coming. We didn't announce the other one yet. We've got some Christian shows, pop, rock, country rock, classic rock. We do a whole genre. So it's something for everybody. A lot of the bands are like from the 80s and 90s, so some of you might not recognize some of their names. But I'm really excited about the concert series and the venue itself, and that'll do a great job. And why do we do that? Because we need to bring people downtown. Why? Because if we have, like last year, we just had 3 shows and the park wasn't even finished yet. It was still under construction. I don't remember how many people we had, but we had a lot of people from all over California. We had people from, see if I can remember this now, Arizona, Tennessee, Florida. We had some people from overseas that came, and people would be like, well, how does that happen? And I'll tell you exactly how it happens. Because there's a lot of people that will follow certain bands. They want to see certain bands. And when you pair the band with a location, people will be like, you know, I need to visit my Aunt Susie who lives in Bakersfield, but there's no real reason to go. But Los Lobos is coming, and I haven't seen them in 5 years. I can go see like that happens all the time. And so our producer will market outside of the community. Even though we want folks in our community, he puts more of his energy and time and money to market to people outside of the community. So they will come and they will spend the weekend. Now our hotels are filled, our restaurants get patronized, and downtown over time, as they have more successful businesses that'll attract, they will get more patronized. So that's sort of the theory behind Zumwalt Park. And why did we spend money? We're spending about $15 million in total on the, that's everything from surveying to design to construction to everything. Construction is about 12 million. Because when I came into the city, we had about $15 million in what are called federal ARPA funds. So that was funds from all the taxpayers in the country. We got $15 million of it to use, not for anything we wanted, but we could use it for a variety of things. I had a lot of people say, well, we should have used it to fix our streets. And I will tell you, as an outsider coming into Tulare, we have a real issue with deferred maintenance. We have a lot of streets that are in bad shape, and we're working to figure out how to solve that problem. The problem with using all that $18 million on streets is we would have done 3 subdivisions. A subdivision costs about $6 million a pop to redo the streets. And remember, this is not, oh, well, this is government bloated, expended. No, we go out and low bid it, and that's what the numbers are. So if we had done 3 neighborhoods, the people in those neighborhoods would have been happy, but what else would we have gotten? We wouldn't have leveraged that money to do anything else for us. So we used $5 million of that towards Zumwalt Park. We had $7.5 million of developer park impact fees. Those are fees the developer pays when they build a subdivision. You have to spend that money within 5 years, and if you don't, you have to give it back to the developer. So we needed to spend 5 of that $7.5 million, or we would have lost it. So we put that $5 million into Zumwalt Park, and the balance of that money is from general fund surplus reserves. Okay. So normally when a city does a project like this, if they're going to do it, you would use just your local tax dollars to pay for it. All of it would be local tax dollars. But instead we used 2/3 of it came really from other sources, not our local tax dollars. One of the other reasons why we spent so much on it is because when we started the project, we were going to build a smaller project and a smaller venue, but we decided to build something that was going to be much better. And there's a couple of reasons for it. One is we wanted to attract better talent, and you have to understand the talent that comes, it's kind of like when you go to a place, like let's say you go to Airbnb and you rate it on Yelp, talent does the same thing. There's a back end network that all the managers and the artists look at, and they will rate us just like we rate them. And so the better your venue is, the better, like it has a green room attached to it. That's where the artists can shower and be before the show instead of in their RV. Like that adds bonus points for us. So we'll get better talent over time because of our amenities. We want higher quality talent. And we also wanted to build a venue that would be hard for our surrounding jurisdictions to compete with us, right? Because once they see it works, there's other jurisdictions be like, oh, well, I want to do that, right? But now if they want to do it, they're going to have to spend 20 or 25 million. That's a much bigger decision for them because the free money is not there anymore, right? So that's Zumwalt Park. I'll give you another one. We got a lot going on. We'll talk about the homeless shelter. And you'll say, well, I thought you were the city manager and you were going to talk about economic development. And I'm going to say, I am talking about economic development. We're going to talk about the homeless shelter. It's page 14. It's this. Well, why is economic development have anything to do with a homeless shelter? Well, let me ask you something. If you own a house and you wanted to sell your house, what's the first thing you do? You fix up your house. You clean it up. You mow the front yard. You take care of the hedges. You paint the front door. You take some good looking pictures of it. You make it presentable and you make it ready. We have a challenge with homelessness. The whole state of California does. The whole nation does, particularly California, for a variety of reasons. And we're subject, unfortunately, to some of those decisions that are made at the state capitol. And so we have a homeless population that varies, but every year we have to sort of go out and count the homeless individuals that are out there. Some will talk to us, some won't. I'm talking about the people on the streets, not the people that are couch surfing or in the motels or living out of their car. I mean, unless we can catch them, not catch them, but we see them and we talk to them. I mean, we're talking about the people in the encampments on the street. When I first got here 3.5 years ago, we had upwards of almost 400 on the railroad tracks, if you remember that. And council made a decision which I think was really a smart decision. They made a decision to move them, to buy a piece of land. It's by the Hillman Health Center, kind of south of the fairgrounds, sort of in the center, but the industrial side of the city. They bought a piece of land and they built, which is kind of like a KOA campground. It's called the Tulare Cares Temporary Encampment. It can house up to 200 individuals. So we've had historically between 200 and 200, we'll just say 50 individuals that are kind of Tulare-based individuals. Now it fluctuates, where the homeless population fluctuates, so they move, right? So you could have somebody coming in here from Los Angeles, has nothing to do with the city of Tulare. They're just passing through, or they decided to come here. Or you could have somebody who was born and raised here and been homeless for most of their life and they stay here, but they can go to Porterville or Visalia, then they come back, right? So it's a dynamic situation, very fluid. But generally speaking, about 200 to 225, they're Tulare-based. So we built the encampment with the intention of building a homeless shelter. We had to figure out, okay, are we going to build a shelter or not? Why are we building a shelter? Because at the time, there was a law, it was called the Boise versus Martin decision, that said you can't prohibit people from camping in public space unless you have a bed for them to go into. If you don't have a bed, then where are they supposed to go, right? I think it kind of makes sense. I don't like it, but it kind of makes sense. And so we needed to make a decision of whether we're going to build a homeless shelter or not, meaning the bed. Council made the decision to do that, which I think is the right decision. That decision changed over time. The Supreme Court of the United States took that decision up, and it was called the Grants Pass decision. And they kind of changed that. They didn't say you have to build a homeless shelter. Really what they were focusing on in that is enforcing someone and not allowing to live on the streets. Is that considered cruel and unusual punishment? And they decided that it's not. But that decision didn't say that you still don't have to treat individuals humanely. And it didn't say that you can just start lining them up and shooting them, or you can take them and transport them somewhere else to another city. So you still kind of end up in the same place we are now, which is, unless we have a place where they can go, they're going to be in our streets and our neighborhoods, right? And so we are moving down this path. We built the encampment. That's where we started. One of the biggest reasons we built the encampment was to clean up the railroad, because we had about 14 suicides over the last decade. Because when you're a homeless individual and you're in distress, depressed, probably, maybe out of your mind. There's a lot of opinions people have about homeless. Some people say, oh, they just all choose to live that way. Not exactly. Some of them, I mean, we know all of them. Some of them have drug addiction problems, which their choice. Some have mental illness problems, not their choice. Some of them suffer from traumatic trauma, serious trauma. Most of that's not their choice. Some of them actually have a job, but they can't afford to live in a house. They have a part-time job, right? There's a lot of veterans that are homeless. It's all over the place. There's no one type. But we built the encampment so that we would get them into a centralized location, because on the railroad track, they're spread out. Just imagine 400 encampments, and somebody calls us and says, hey, the homeless guy in the encampment on a railroad track is having a fentanyl overdose. Well, which guy on the railroad track? Which one? The dark tent. What? But now at the encampment, it's like lot 68. Like, we know exactly where they're at, right? And so we did that. We tried to eliminate, as best we could, the suicides. We also wanted, why is it economic development? Because you got to clean your front door. If you don't clean up your community, you can't expect more people to invest in your community, right? So we moved them away from there, put them to the encampment. The highest peak, we had about 200. Now we're about 125, something like that. somewhere between 125, 150. It varies there all the time. So far, most of that was funded with grant funds, federal and state funds. About 60% of it was. So we're really fortunate, got a bunch of funding from other sources. About 100 of those individuals have been put into permanent supportive housing. So they're off the streets and they're living in housing right now. A little more than 100. So we're moving forward with the shelter. It'll be completed by January of next year. It'll support up to 400. But we're not intending to put 400. Right now, we're intending just to put the people from the encampment in there. Not all of them will go. Not all of them want to follow rules, but they won't have much of a choice. If they're Tulare based, they either go into the shelter. If they start encamping out on the street, then they'll eventually be arrested and taken to jail. So that's the ultimate end game in that situation is you have to have a balance of what I always call justice and mercy. You have to, on the one hand, be humane and treat people like human beings and try to help them. And on the other hand, you have to hold them accountable. And when you put both of those together in the right way, things seem to work pretty good. When you're just all mercy and no accountability, it's not great. And when you're all justice and no mercy, it's not great either. So we put both of those together through the shelter. And that'll be operated by a local nonprofit. We'll only start out with about 150 in there. But we had to have capacity up to 400. Why? Well, let's say another recession hits and all of a sudden we have 50 of our residents lose their jobs and they have nowhere else to go. We have to have capacity for our citizens. This is not for people in Los Angeles or in these other places. They have to prove to us that they have a tie here. They have to be born here, have to have family here, went to school here. There has to be some tie to Tulare for them to be eligible to go there. There's a lot more to it. I could spend this whole session on just the homeless shelter or any of these topics. Every one of these topics is very deep. Most of them are fairly complicated. I'll give you a high-level review of them. So I gave you two broad examples of economic development. I'll give you one last one and then I'll open up to questions. So the first one was, how do you do economic development through parks, right? What do parks have to do with economic development? Now you know. The second one is, how do you do economic development through the homeless shelter? Now you know. You got to clean up your community. If you turn to, what do we want to look at? Let's go to this one, 9 and 10. 9 and 10. So this would be probably more like mainstream economic development work that you'd think a city would do. The city has some powerful tools that can be used to encourage economic development. One is through infrastructure investment. This image is the new interchange that's being built by the agriculture center, okay? The ag center. That's not funded by us, that's by Caltrans. Right now, Caltrans is investing, right now it's $550 million in the city limits. They're widening Highway 99 to 6 lanes throughout the entire city. They're just about finished with they built Cart Mill several years ago, interchange. They're finishing J Street. They're building this new interchange. This will be the 8th interchange in the city limits. And then as soon as they're done with this one, they're going to reconstruct the Page interchange. So Page interchange right now, when you look at it, Page goes over 99. It's going to reverse. Page is going to be surface level street and 99 will go over Page. This is all good for us because every time you build an interchange, all of a sudden it's like dropping a pebble in the water and you have all these ripple effects. Now all of a sudden land around it can develop, right? You can create all kinds of other uses and jobs there and revenue streams from that. This is an example of the kind of projects that we want to attract over time. This type of building. Why? Because we think we're ideally located for warehousing, distribution, and logistics types of companies. Why? Because we're in the center of the state. 8 hours to the north, 8 hours to the south, same day delivery of fresh goods, frozen goods. We are right on Highway 99. They're making major expansion and investments in 99. And we have a major rail line running right through the city. Those are all good reasons to try to attract more users like that. This is a project that's out by Page right now. It's a warehouse, about 600,000 square feet. They don't have a tenant in it yet. They build it speculatively. They'll get a tenant in it eventually. They have an option to build 3 more of those. So about 2 million square feet in total in the city of Tulare. You've already seen it working in Visalia. We're behind Visalia. We should never have been behind, but we are behind Visalia. Should have been here. But we're going to start taking advantage of it now. If you look at this one on the bottom, this is U.S. Cold Storage. That's an existing facility in Tulare. They keep expanding it. Like They do an expansion and then they turn right around and start another expansion. Why? Because they're growing like gangbusters, because it makes sense for them to be located here. This is their largest facility in the United States that U.S. Cold Storage has. And they keep expanding it. They're about 1 million square feet. I think they'll go to 2 million eventually. Because you have all this frozen good. They have, you go in there, they have tons of, butter and dairy products, a lot of frozen goods, other kinds of food you microwave and eat, and they just distribute them out throughout the whole state. Same day delivery. So that I give you a good variety of economic development stuff. There's way more that I'm not telling you about. I'm happy to tell you about. I'll tell you the secret project at the end. What questions do you have so far? No questions are off limits. It could be about anything. Yeah. No, it does. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things when I took this job and I came to the city, I came here from Rockland, very different city. I've worked as a city manager. This is my first time as a city manager, but I was an assistant city manager in 2 other cities. All 3 cities were 70,000 population, 22 square miles. 2 of the 3 were surrounded by agriculture. So I was in the city of Rockland and in the city, that's just north of Sacramento by Roseville. And then I was the ACM of Ocala, Florida. Ocala and Tulare are very similar, right in the middle of the state, agriculture, major highway, major railroad. When we were in Ocala, a lot of the same problems that we had in Tulare. We had high crime, Tulare has, I don't want to say high crime like it gets you all scared, but we have managed crime, but it's higher than where I want it to be. We have relatively low educational attainment in the city. And we have relatively low wages, right? Those are not great things. You want to change, you want to turn all those things around. The city charter doesn't tell us to turn any of those around other than police, right? But you can't just turn things around with just police. You can't enforce your way into people behaving properly. That's a part of the equation. What you want to do is provide people with more economic opportunity. You want to be able to give people a reason to have hope and strive to do better and to do more. And when we work with economic development, we attract more jobs. That brings more revenue to the city and gives people more opportunities to elevate their income and move up. Like you look at U.S. Cold Storage, they got a ton of workers in there that before they worked in this job were working in the fields. And now they have a full-time job within benefits and employment benefits, and they can progress their way up through the system. So to answer your question about potholes, the answer is economic development. So we have a lot of opportunity. When I first came here, I looked at the city, we had a lot of opportunity. When I was in Ocala, we had a city, we took that city in 10 years that had a $350 million budget, and it's over $1 billion now. And we did that through economic development. And what's great about that is we probably did 40 economic development deals, job creation deals. Now they have enough revenue where they can fix all the potholes. They have enough cash where they can go hire more cops. They're building 2 parking garages. They're just paying cash for it, right? So they don't have to take on debt, right? That's how we did that in a period of about 10 years. We want to do similar things here. So as much as when I first came to Tulare, I saw all this opportunity, right? Like, oh man, we can take advantage of this and this and this. At the same time, the other thing is like, we have tons of deferred maintenance. You have no idea how much deferred maintenance you have. You see the roads. That's the biggest example of deferred maintenance that we have to fix, but we don't have enough revenue to fix it. Our finances are such, I would say, is like this. We're paying the bills. We're stable, but we have to turn things around and attract more job creation, more economic development, or we're going to die that sort of slow death I told you about before, okay? And I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just saying at some point, like we have pretty good reserves, but that's one-time money. That's not regular recurring money. You don't balance budget on reserve. You balance it on regular recurring revenue, right? So we've got pretty healthy reserves, but we have to use those reserves really wisely. We have to invest them in things. Like I said before, if we just take, it's like that $18 million in ARPA. We take that money, we just fix 3 neighborhoods, that money's gone. We never see it again. But if we invest it in other projects where that attracts more private investment, now we use that revenue to fund the potholes, right? So we're going to spend the next 18 months. Next Friday, we have a strategic planning session, and then most of that whole session is about finances. It's about how do we work to solve these long-term problems? Because we have to generate more revenue and more revenue streams, more revenue sources. Ideally, we want to try to do our best without taxing our local government, our citizens as best as we can, right? There's a combination of things you have to do to be able to get to all the potholes. And we have some money dedicated to potholes, but not enough, okay? You have to find ways to save money, but you can't really save yourself, in my opinion, as a government into economic prosperity. It's an important component, right? Be more efficient, spend less money on things, right? Get more value out of things, right? And we've done that. Over the last 3 years, we have done 3 projects that are saving the taxpayers $1 million a year in expenses. We privatized street sweeping. That saved us about $300,000 a year. We did what's called a meter totalization project with Edison. So we had all these different meters everywhere, and we were able to take them together and put them into a single meter, and that saves us about $400,000 a year. And then we did an energy project with a company called Engie, where they put in, like, all of our buildings have been converted to LED lights, and we have new higher energy efficient air conditioning systems, and all these solar canopies that you see up here, right? Those projects, we do about $13 million in projects with them. They're just about finished. Those projects will save us about $333,000 a year, okay? So we always have to be doing that. How do we save money? How do we do things more efficient? But on the other side of the equation, we have to make sure our taxation structure is right. We got to make sure our fee structures are right, that we're still competitive in the marketplace, but people are paying for the cost to serve, a fair amount of money for cost of services. We're going to talk about this next Friday a whole lot. And then the bigger piece is the economic development. How do we attract new revenue, new income into the city, right? All 3 of those things have to be in work. Once we get to that place, we won't be talking about potholes anymore. We won't be talking about street maintenance anymore. It's going to be taken care of. And my goal, I told council when they hired me, I said, I'll give you 5 years minimum, probably no more than 10. Why? Because I don't believe in city managers staying in a position forever. I don't think it's healthy for them or for the community. I think you bring somebody in who's targeted, that has to have a mission to get certain things done in a time frame, and then there's a new set of things that had to be done, and then you bring an expert in those things. So the person has to move on. The other reason is because, and I have to, once we're successful doing here what we have to do, I can't be like a status quo person. I can't sit around just paying the bills. I need to grow, so I need to take on the next challenge for me. But I told council, it'd probably be from now, I've been here 3.5 years, probably another 3 to 5 years. We're going to get all this done before I go. I don't want to leave unless I know we're in that place where, unless they decide to fire me before that. But on my own, I won't. 3.5. Another 3 to 5. Maybe. It'll be up to my wife a little bit too. So that was a long answer to the question about potholes, but I wanted you to understand that potholes is a bigger question than just a pothole. It represents all of it. When I talk about deferred maintenance, in my opinion, we don't have a great facilities replacement plan. Like, if you came to me and said, when is this roof going to be after replacing that building? I couldn't tell you. I should know that. I can't tell you that. We got people working on it, but I should have a whole facilities maintenance replacement plan in place that shows you, here's all the depreciation on all the facilities, the equipment in the buildings. Here's when this is going to be replaced, right? We're a little bit reactive now. Oh, yeah, this one's got to probably happen. Same thing with our vehicles. We have a fleet replacement plan, but it's not a progressive strategy. It's kind of like we keep fixing it and we run it as long as we possibly can, and then at some point it just dies and then we replace it. Not the best modern way of approaching fleet, for example. So we have to do this with everything we do. We're going as fast as we can. I got to tell you, we're working really, really hard to try to really shape everything up. The organization is a good organization. It's got really good bones, good people, hardworking. It's just it hasn't been sophisticated enough. So we're trying to bring that up. And I think we'll get to the place where, because a lot of people look at us and they say, well, we're a small town. No, we're not. We're a mid-sized city. What we want to do is have a level of sophistication of a mid-sized to a larger city, but protect and maintain some of the small town character that we have. We can do both if we do it right. Okay, another question. That was a long answer. I'll try to make this one shorter. I'm long-winded. All right, what's the next question? Yeah, the contract's through the end of January next year. We're hoping it'll be sooner than that. And we'll only start out with 150. And every time that we go to increase capacity, like we only bought 200 beds because our goal is to keep, well, I'll tell you a couple things. When we build a facility, it's big enough to support up to 400. But remember I said we don't want to go to 400. We want to keep capacity in case we have more of our citizens that fall into homelessness, like a big recession comes again, like the Great Recession. You see people dropping out, right? Unfortunately. But one of the ways we're controlling how many people go in there is a couple ways. First of all, we only bought 200 beds. So that's how many that's the message we can have until we buy more beds. That's easy. But we're also building minimum bathroom facilities. We're not building enough facilities to support 400. We have the room to build them, but we're only going to build enough facilities to support up to 180 per code right now. So that way, in the future, if all of a sudden we decide we need more, we go back to council and we say, are you ready to take on more? And they'll have to make that decision. Because, you know, a lot of people are afraid that once it's finished, they're going to come from everywhere. And there may be an influx for a little while, and then they'll be pushed back out, unless they're Tulare based. Trying to think how to answer that. I don't, the fundamental answer is nothing. That's something we contribute through our taxes as individuals. But I'm trying to think, like, if you're specifically referring to welfare, like a specific program, then I would say the city doesn't directly contribute to that. But I'll give you another example. Like if you look at, in this book on page is it on? Here we go, page 13, the Santa Fe Commons project. Okay, that's a great little project. I don't know if it's little, but I'd like to have 3 or 4 more of those projects. It's built by a great company called Self-Help, nonprofit. Yeah. So Santa Fe Commons is an affordable housing complex. They have a mix of income levels in there. So they have folks that are probably what's called 30% AMI, average median income, I think is what it is, something like that. All the way up to probably, I don't know if they're true market rate. I think they probably go as high as 80% AMI. So like 80% AMI would be entry-level teachers, firefighters, cops. That's 80% AMI. 30% AMI would be folks who, you know, are kind of coming out of homelessness. So that facility right there, how many did they take? About 30, do you know? 30? Yeah, that run right there, about 30 of the individuals from the homeless encampment who now qualify for other funding are in that facility. When I said we had 100, we've had about 140. I said 100 earlier, but I think it's closer to 140 that we've had go into permanent supportive housing. 30 went into that complex. So we don't directly contribute to welfare, but the city did take some of its money. We have all, remember these different pots of money that I told you about? We had some money that came in from a source that could only be used for affordable housing. So we used that money to help offset some of the costs of construction of this project. So I think it was a couple $1,000,000 that we put into helping build this project. So it's not a direct contribution to welfare, but there are people in here that are on welfare or people that are on Section 8 housing, right? Vouchers. And so that's how we would contribute in that case. Okay. What other questions? He's not the only one with questions. I know that. There's, are you talking about charter and non-charter cities? Yeah, that's the form of government. Yeah, so there's a strong mayor and then there's a council manager form of government. We're a council manager. Yeah. Yeah, Fresno's example of that. Yeah. Yeah, I have strong opinions about what are good forms and not and why, but that's just my opinion. There's successful cities that are strong mayor forms of government too. I'm not a big fan of it though. Because I would say to you this way. In my opinion, really well-functioning cities they're most often that I find that are really well-functioning cities are the council manager form of government because there's more distinct roles in what the manager and the council does, right? And I think really good councils are ones that are in it for the right reasons. Like they just want to help their community be better. And when we have a variety of different backgrounds on council, that's very helpful. And when the worst functioning cities, in my opinion, is when you have council members that are there for either they all want to be the city manager. And that doesn't work when you have 5 different city managers. Or they only really have political aspirations to go upstream, like they want to be the governor. And so they're just trying to make news and do things that benefit them, but doesn't really benefit the community. We're really fortunate we don't have any of that here. We have 5 council members. This is the best council I've ever been with. And I mean it. I don't have to say it, right? I could just not say anything about council if I didn't mean it. But I want you to know that. They're very civil. They're smart. They deliberate. They ask for more information. They bring their own ideas to the table. They have passion in different areas, which helps balance them out. They only all really want Tulare to be successful. They don't, from a city manager perspective, they're really great because I communicate with them regularly, but they don't like call me at 2 a.m. You know, we talk regularly. I send them a report every Friday. So we're talking all the time, but they respect staff and what staff has to get done. They don't micromanage, which is really important. Okay, what other questions? The tower, yeah. That's a complex issue. It's not really a city issue per se. I wasn't here a number of years ago where there was a lot of maybe legal matters involving the hospital and the tower. There's a lot of challenges there because, you know, the tower was built but never really fully occupied. Parts of it are occupied, but it's definitely not fully occupied. It hasn't all been retrofitted up to necessarily meet the whole hospital to meet earthquake standards. And that's very expensive. And just to get that hospital fully occupied now and fully equipped, I like the last estimate I heard was like $100 million. And so the city was involved with them. We have a vested interest in their success. I mean, having a community that has a fully functioning hospital helps us from an economic development perspective and a health perspective and a wellness perspective. The city some years ago helped them, the hospital district that controls the hospital, with a loan that they did pay back. But it's not really our problem to solve. And Adventist Health is a pretty good organization. We're fortunate that they're in our community. They're making a lot of investments. One of the reasons, like this book that we put together, we put one together every year. So this is 2023. 2024's will come out in the next couple of months. We're wrapping it. We're getting close to wrapping it up now. But most of the projects that are in here are city-based projects. We're either leading them or we're participating in them, like partnering in them. But we had a whole section on Adventist Health, and we put them in here because they're important to the city's success. They're a part of our community. So we celebrate 2 things. Like we have COS has their facility in here. You know, we didn't participate in theirs financially, but this is doing job training for folks, and they annexed into the city limits, so they're part of us now, right? The pool project, we did put money into the pool project. We put $500,000 of those ARPA funds to help them build this pool. So we got 2 things out of that investment. One is we helped make this pool a reality. This is a very expensive project. I think it was $22 million. We put 500 of your money, well, not yours necessarily, of the ARPA funds, everyone else's money. But what we got for that, in addition to this pool, was we lease from them the Tulare Western pool in the summertime. So we have open swim for the public, for our kids, especially, you know, there's a lot of low income families in the west side, and kids can just walk to the pool. We signed a 20-year lease with them. So that $500,000 bought us a 20-year lease. to be able to use that pool for the summer times. That way we don't have to build our own pool and have our own aquatics programs. We have it at their pool. So it helps save money for us. They do, there's a movement in California that says that all city councils should be elected by district. Not all are, but all will eventually be districts. I'm not a huge fan of the districts, but I don't mind it. I prefer city councils to have a collective view of the whole city's interests and not compete with each other, right? Like, well, my district's more important than your district. Well, if you get that in yours, I better get that in mine, right? We're really fortunate that our council is mindful of the district and where they live and the citizens that they answer to who elected them. They're mindful of that and they try to address their issues. But they have 1 foot in the district and 1 foot in the city. That's really important. There are other cities that are districts and it's like a battle all day long. All they do is fight about their district. And it's hard to get anything done at a big scale of the city. It's like, we're going to build a new park in my district. Well, I want one in mine. And they're going to build 5 parks. We have enough to build 1, right? So they don't get into that stuff. They do a really good job, in my opinion, but at the same time of looking at both sides of it. At the same time, though, they're mindful of, you can't have different laws in different districts. You can't say, we're going to, like a lot of people will ask for, they want a stop sign, like on a road, they want a stop sign. Right? Well, there's a process you have to go through to put a stop sign in. It sounds simple, but you don't really want it to be a political decision, right? Because what you want the stop sign to be based on is what's called a warrant. Like there has to be empirical data and evidence. There's a Caltrans standard you follow that will determine like whether you put a traffic signal in or a stop sign. There has to be reasons for it, not just I have an opinion or I want it there. Because when you start making political only decisions in something like that, then the city just buys lawsuits. So somebody gets in an accident, an attorney goes, was there a warrant for you to put a stop sign there? No, there was no warrant study. We just put one there for political reasons. Oh, great. My client died because of that stop sign. Write a check, right? Then it's all of your money going to them. So we make a lot of decisions that are based in the law and science, right? And if all of a sudden you had a council member who was like, well, I want stop signs throughout my whole district, that would get kind of hokey. When it's like one district has all these stop signs based on political reasons and then the rest of the city doesn't have. So you don't want to get too much into that, That was just an example of stop sign. You could use anything as an example. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot there, right? I'll try to answer that from this perspective. There's always going to be situations where there's some areas that are more backed up than others in the city. What you are willing to accept as acceptable in terms of the amount of traffic and somebody else differs. That's another example like the stop sign I gave you where there's standards we follow, right? It's called level of service. So it might take you 1 or 2 stops to get through that stop sign or traffic signal, right? You get up to it, you don't get through, you go up a little further, you don't get through, and you get through next time, right? For most of us, it would be like, this is outrageous. Like, I don't want to live like this anymore. But that might not meet the level of service standard that requires us to have to make a change, okay? We follow these standards, right, for a level of service. And so there's part of the cities where it's worse than others. I would tell you particularly where it's troublesome is on the east. Actually, I'm gonna make this statement too. I get people who will say to me, the city doesn't care about West Tulare. We're investing all our money in East Tulare and none of the money in West Tulare, and that's not true. I'll tell you exactly what the truth is. We invest all of your money, the taxpayers' money, pretty evenly throughout the city. I can show you a map that shows where we make our investments, okay? What's the difference then? It's the private sector. The private sector is not investing in West Tulare. They're investing in East Tulare. Why is that? Well, I'll give you my opinion. Unfortunately, when you look at West Tulare, and this is not intended to be a value opinion, this is intended to be what the facts are. The crime rate's higher in West Tulare, the income levels are lower in West Tulare, and the educational attainment's lower than West Tulare. When you look at investment, they want to put their money where they have a much more reasonable expectation for a return, because there's a lot of risk in investing in a business, a ton of risk. You know, you could put your money into market and, you know, you might be willing to live with a 10 or 15% return. That might be good. But when you're going to invest millions of dollars in a private development, you better go into it expecting to get a 20 or 30% return. Otherwise, it's not really probably worth your time, right? Too much risk, put the money somewhere else. And so all these businesses, and I'm talking mostly retailers, but it doesn't matter. There's metrics that they look for, right? So they're looking for a certain amount of traffic trips in front of their business. They're looking for infrastructure that's installed, water, sewer, all those things. They're looking for educational attainment and income levels and all that around them. And it's like, there's some businesses we all want, but I'm like, until we meet those metrics, they're never coming here. You have to hit certain metrics for them to even look at you, right? And so, you know, there's a difference between West and East. We have more traffic issues on the east side because we have more development there. So we just showed council a couple months ago the long-term traffic circulation plan and strategy for how to fix all that stuff. If we had a ton of money, and I would say a ton of regular recurring money, we could just go, oh, those are city projects. We'll just build those out and we'll fix everything. But we don't. So how do you do it? You do it over time through development. So if a developer comes in and says, I want to build a subdivision here, okay, well then here's the list of things you're going to have to do as part of your project. You got to fix, you know, Bardsley, you got to put a traffic signal in a turn lane, and it happens incrementally. So one of the other reasons why we really have to diversify our revenue streams and generate more revenue as well is not only because we want to create more jobs and all those other opportunities. There's a lot of other projects that I don't want to wait 20 years to happen after incrementally each development happens. They build their section of it. I'd rather the city take it on and do it now, and then we can go back over time and charge those developers when those projects come in. But at least for the public, it's done, right? But we have to have the money to do that. So we have a ton of examples of things like that where we could do a lot more to fix potholes, fix streets, if we had the revenue stream coming in. We're working on that. You know, you can give me your opinions too. Anyone want to have a discussion about a topic? You don't have to agree with me. You can debate with me. I welcome it because that's sometimes how I learn. I go through debates, I'm like, that's a really great point. Then I take it like it's mine. Right now, we're working to try to work towards balancing out, but it's hard because, you know, what I've shared with council is you have to do sort of the low hanging fruit first, like where we can maximize, put the fewest dollars necessary into an area to get the biggest return, right? Because the bigger return we get and the faster return we get, now we can take that money and invest it in other areas, right? Most of that is in places where we're not fighting economic gravity. We don't have other factors fighting against us, right? And there's a lot of factors fighting against us. I mean, for example, we're 30 years behind where we should be, in my opinion. Not because we've done anything wrong, just we haven't been aggressive about keeping up with things. And like I look at our competitor to the north in Visalia, right? They're twice our size. I'm not saying we want to be like Visalia or their size, but you know, they've got 2 Costco's and 1 Sam's Club. We should have had one of those. One of those should have been in our community. Why do they keep building them? They keep building the stuff on the south end of Visalia. Why? So they'll attract us to go spend our money up there. We have to reverse that. When I was in Rockland, same thing was in Rockland. When I came to that city, there was a $600 million a year outflowage of our sales tax money to the city of Roseville, because they made a decision a long time ago, the forefathers, decades before I showed up. In Rockland, they said, we want to be the place where all the people live, and they come home and it's quiet and it's safe and it's comfortable and all those things. And we'll let Roseville have the shopping and all that stuff. What a massive mistake that was. Roseville grabbed it. If you look at that city, they're in great financial shape compared to Rockland. Rockland has much higher incomes. It's a nicer quality community. But just because you have higher incomes doesn't necessarily equate to you being a more financially viable city. Like Rockland doesn't have any utilities. We have utilities, which is a huge disadvantage for them compared to us. Because remember the tax example, the property tax example I gave you, where everyone thinks we make so much money off of property tax? If that's all you're banking on is property tax, good luck. Good luck. It ain't much. You pay a lot of property taxes, but we ain't getting most of that. And so Rockland struggles, but when we got there, we had $600 million in sales tax was flowing out in total sales. That's not how much we would get. In 7 years, we turned that around. And we worked with the private sector. We built some really big shopping facilities. We brought a Bass Pro Shop in and a few other things. And we turned that around. But I mean, it takes concerted effort. It doesn't happen. It's not magic. It's not luck. I mean, sometimes there's a little bit of luck. But it takes a lot of hard, concerted, disciplined, committed action to say, this is what we're trying to get done here. And you have a shot at doing it. But right now, for example, if somebody was to look at our community, depends on what you're talking about, there's a good chance they prefer to be in Visalia than here. So we have to figure out how to change that. So we have to be creative and do things that they're not doing. A few big things. First was, and I'm not sure what the right order would be here, so I'll just say them all. Maybe the first was the opportunity. Well, I was looking to be a city manager, right? I had been interviewing a few places. I was on a finalist list in a few places. Tulare, the stars aligned in Tulare, which was good for me because probably the other two places, one was out of state, and that would have been further away from my kids. They're adult children now, but so that wasn't going to be great for me. But anyways, the opportunity not just to be the city manager, but the opportunity of things that I see that we can capitalize on that we're not capitalizing on. Like, wow, if we do this, if we do that, we can really move the dial here. And coupled closely with that was this council's desire to do that. And when I came here, like I heard from council and I heard from the community, like, we're ready to go. We're ready to get some good things happening. It's like, and I remember sitting in the interviews, I'm like, are you sure? Because if you mean it, like we're going to do it, but it's hard work and you got to be committed to it. And people are going to complain about all kinds of stuff. And I'm not saying you don't listen to those complaints. Like, for example, Zumwalt Park. A lot of people complain about us doing Zumwalt Park, and I get it. And I'm not saying we're right and they're wrong. I'm just saying we have answers to those questions. We're like, oh, you're removing all these trees. And I'm like, yeah, but we're planting 2 for 1. For every tree we remove, we're going to plant 2 trees. So you have to address the concerns, but you can't allow a concern like that to get in the way of making some of the progress that you're trying to make, because there's not a lot of moves. I can't tell council, we have 100 different things we can do. I could tell council we got about 5 or 6. Pick 2 or 3 of them. But after that, there's not a lot of those things have been taken up by other people already, right? Other cities. So that was probably the first. The second would be my wife and I've said this before, she's a country girl and I'm a city guy. And we had to find a place where we could do both comfortably. When I met her, she had 6 dogs and 4 horses. Now we only have 2 horses and 2 dogs. So I see in the future, something's going to happen here pretty soon. And so she has to be out in the country and we have to find a place where we can do both quickly. Like, right. I think that was important, a place that we both would be happy. And Terry knows the other reason why. And so do you. It's partly a spiritual thing for me. There's a lot of personal spiritual satisfaction out of it. So, but that's important to me. So, what other questions? Okay. So I'm going to tell you what it is. You're not going to get a ton of information. We're going to issue a press release tomorrow. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to be pursuing, we don't have any, what's the word I want to describe? Nothing is completely solid and solidified yet. But, I hear a lot of people say to me, well, there's nothing to do. Well, I'll tell you this way. when I first was researching Tulare, I looked up the top 10 things to do in Tulare, okay? It was not very exciting. 7 of the 10 things were in Visalia. One of the top list the things was the Historical Museum, which, by the way, I think is an amazing historical museum, but it shouldn't be in the top 10 things probably. Maybe if so, maybe more like 7, 8, or 9 or somewhere back in there, not number 1 or 2. Del Lago Park, beautiful park. It's a neighborhood park, maybe at best sort of arguably regional. It shouldn't be in your top 10 things to do. And so, and I've heard from people like, hey, we need to have more things to do. I mean, we have some great things. We have the outlets, which are great. We have the Ag Center, which is great. And they're looking to double that and expand it and add more equine events, which will be amazing for all of us. It's a good thing for our community. But now we're going to have Zumwalt Park, right? We have another we're building a first dog park. Those are nice little things. They're not huge. Zumwalt's pretty good size. Dog Park's a little bit smaller. I think we should have a few more dog parks before we're done. But the other thing that we're going to announce tomorrow is we're working to create an entertainment district here. And you could say, well, what is an entertainment district? It would be there's a number of entertainment districts. There is no like exact definition. You went home and Googled it. It's not like this is the Webster's dictionary definition of entertainment district, but you kind of know them when you see them. They're all over the country. So when I was in Ocala, a big project we worked on was we were trying to build a New York Yankees minor league baseball stadium. And because we were building that stadium, we had it all worked out, had everything done. We started getting a lot of interest from other users. We had a Bass Pro Shop that wanted to come in. We had a Dave & Buster's that wanted to come in because they want to be around where you have a critical mass of people coming in with money. They want to be around that, right? You go around the country, you see things like that. Sometimes they happen haphazardly, like they just kind of organically start shaping and then all of a sudden they run out of space. Sometimes you take a flat piece of land and you build it from the beginning the right way. So when I talk about entertainment district, I'm talking about uses that are more like destination retailers, things like a Bass Pro Shop, Top Golf, Great Wolf Lodge, well, Dave & Buster's, Dave & Buster's have bowling alleys, yeah. Those kind of uses that attract people from outside the area. So it gives our residents something to do from an entertainment perspective, but it also attracts people from the outside to spend money in our community, kind of like Zumwalt Park at a bigger scale. So we've done a study. We had a consultant do a study. So when I was in Florida and we were doing the Yankee project, that project died. It didn't happen because what happened was, I probably shouldn't say this publicly. It died for political reasons. That's the easiest way to put it. And it wasn't our political reasons. It was different entities. They killed the project. And they killed the project because they wanted to steal the project. And then the project fell apart. They had no business stealing the project. They should have worked with us. They would have gotten more revenue. And in the end, nobody got any revenue. That's what greed does to you. Anyways, but those uses that wanted to come around there, the consultant came in and picked all those up and brought them 45 minutes north to the city of Gainesville, and they built the district there. And one of the things that they had that was the center core part of it that helped attract those users is the city and county in that community came together and built an indoor sports recreation facility that constantly had teams from all over the country coming in there playing tournaments, right? And so when I was in Rockland, Placer Valley Tourism did the same thing. It was 3 cities, and all the hotels in those cities got together and added an additional TOT tax. That's a hotel tax on a night stay. And they used that revenue to put the money back into the city's sports fields. So the fields are always in great condition. And the fields are used by locals, residents, and local teams during certain days and certain times. And at other times, they're teams from outside the region that come in and use those fields. And they did so well because their goal, the hotel's goal, was they had really good occupancy rates, occupancy levels, and room rates on weekends, but it was really poor during the week. So by bringing these tournaments during the week, now their hotels are filled, right? And it's a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy because now all of a sudden those hotels are filled, they're paying more TOT tax, and more money's coming in, and you can use that money to do things. So they had so much money. They built a $32 million indoor sports facility that had 12 indoor basketball courts, volleyball nets that came out of the ceiling, So they constantly had either basketball tournaments, volleyball tournaments, wrestling tournaments, or cheer tournaments. And the whole space had a big wood floor, so they would pull all the stuff into the ceiling, the basketball nets and the volleyball nets and everything, and then they'd have trade shows. So it's always being used. And so in our parks master plan, it calls for 2 big park improvements, a lot of little ones, but 2 big park improvements. 1, a regional sportsplex, and 2, a big indoor rec facility. So we already have a need for that, okay? And the city could, normally the way cities would do this, they would take general fund dollars, the same dollars we use to hire more cops and fix roads or whatever. They'd take general fund dollars and they'd go build a sports facility. And normally they would do it in a park somewhere, and it would be just to the benefit of just the citizens. I'm not saying that's not good, but that's all that it would be. Or you could do the same thing like I described that happened in Rockland or in Gainesville. You don't have general fund dollars pay for all of it. You have out-of-town people who are staying in your hotels through their TOT tax pay for it. That way we get a recreation facility built by somebody else paying for it. And you build that facility as part of the entertainment district. You don't build it in a park, and that becomes an anchored tenant in the entertainment district, which now attracts Bass Pro Shop and Great Wolf Lodge and these other uses, right? So that's a way of doing something, still getting your needs met with other people's money and leveraging it to make even more revenue and more services, right? How many of you would like to go to Bass Pro Shop or like to go to Studio Movie Grill or Top Golf or any of those other uses that you have to drive somewhere to go to now versus you just drive down the street, right? So, and where would we want to put those? Right near I-90 or Highway 95. Why? Because that's where they're going to want to be, because they want the visibility and they want to be able to have access to it. And we don't want them driving through our community. We want them to come off the highway, get into the facility, spend their money here, and then go back in their car and drive away, right? So we're going to announce, we're on next Friday, we have a strategic planning session here in this room, Friday from 8 a.m. to noon. And that's when our consultant will present the entertainment district study, phase 1. Phase 1 lays the argument for how this kind of can work. It's either, the 2 areas we've talked about is either by the Ag Center in the new interchange or by the Outlet Mall in Cartmill. Those are, well, what I would say to council is, I would say to council, while we may all personally, and I would agree with you, who really will determine if it's the best place is the market. The people who are going to invest their money will tell us where, if at all, where they're willing to do it. Yeah, and I think we're working on it. We're actually working to have 4 anchors, plus the center being the downtown core, right? The east anchor is the tour annexation with the COS campus. The north is the outlets and what else happens out there. Well, that's to the north. The north is the outlet mall. And then the south is the Ag Center and their expansion. We still have to develop one to the west, which we're working on. So eventually we'll have all these big nodes where activity happens around them. So we're going to announce that tomorrow in a press release. We'll present it to council for the first time at the strategic planning session. We now have the consultant doing phase 2 of the analysis, which is actually start developing the pro formas for the indoor rec facility to make so we can see how that works financially, right? And they're also out there recruiting the companies now. So, yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, and there's a lot of ways this could go. If it, there's a lot of different definitions of success in this project. We could do all this on our own. We can do it all by ourselves. We could partner with another city like we did in Rockland or like they did in Gainesville, could be another city or the county, and say, hey, let's go together and build this facility, right? We could fund it ourselves. We could have somebody in the private sector fund it. We could use TOT tax revenue. There's a lot of ways of piecing this together. It could be that all of a sudden we decide, council, there's no commitment to this yet. We're just fishing. We're just exploring this idea right now. Got to spend a little bit of money to explore some things, right? Because somebody's going to invest millions of dollars. They're not going to come to the city. And if I go, hey, I got this great idea. We should build a sports facility. You want in? You want to? No, they're going to be like, show me the study. Like, show me you're committed to it. Like, how is this going to work? Show me the pro forma, right? How are you going to pay for it? Where is it going to go? When are you going to build it, right? So you have to like move in that direction to get real investment. And I know because I've dealt with these entities before. I know what they look for. So it could happen where our consultants out there beating the bushes, talking to all these guys, and all of a sudden one of the big ones show up, and then other ones start coming after that, kind of like the minor league baseball stadium project. Or it could be we get a master developer that's very interested, and they come in and they say, hey, I built an entertainment district in Indiana and Utah. I want to come and partner with you and I'll build the one here. You work with me and give me some incentives and things to make it happen. So this can go a lot of different directions. We'll see. But you're the first to hear that. And it'll be in the newspaper. Well, it'll be a press release tomorrow, and then it'll be in the newspaper the following week. And then we'll be at the strategic planning session talking about it. But when people say, well, there's nothing to do here, you know, I'll be like, we get this project go forward. It's like, no, we're adding to that list. Now, things that are here in Tulare to do, which, by the way, if we do an entertainment district, that'll make Visalia's list of things to do. I talk a lot. Talk too much. In the background, yeah, quietly. Maybe you want a business card, welcome to it. You can call me, email, or come see me.